Welcome to the space where we're exploring a vision for how to live well in the things we can't help but face. I'm Jason Jensen, and I'm here with my buddy Pete. We are here as part of the series on how to have a relationship with work and vocation. And today I'm hoping that we can talk about the idea of money and value. And I'm here with my buddy Pete. And how are you doing?
I'm doing well.
Yeah.
I'm thankful to come back to a familiar space and with a familiar person and look into things that matter. So that's always a joy for me.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here with you and kind of talking through this. One of the things that got me kind of thinking in this direction a while ago was thinking about Bitcoin. And Bitcoin is notorious for these massive growth and then this massive decline. And that's basically Bitcoin, right? And my theory on it is that Bitcoin has a real trouble pegging itself to value, because at the essence of Bitcoin is that it's a cryptocurrency that's built on blockchain technology. And without going into the details of that, because I'm not an expert in any of those things, but the idea is we can make transactions without a third-party trusted institution. So in some ways, Bitcoin's utility and its value is in being able to skirt around institutional trust.
Yeah, return sovereignty to the possessor of the implement.
Yeah, and in some ways, that's just an FU to, the system, or, it can be. I'm not saying that's how everyone uses it or implements it or whatever. But that's some of where the value comes, but it's not grounded in something necessarily real. It's grounded it's a technology in and of itself. And in that, it had a problem, right? Because it very quickly can be seen as an alternative currency and not a fiat currency, or not a currency that's tied to like a sovereign state, right? And so all of a sudden you've got these two currency things going on. And what ended up solving that in the case of Bitcoin was that it ended up being traded as a commodity on the stock exchange, and commodities being things like gold or silver, or things where the price is set in the market, as opposed to a resource, which would be the collection of commodities together into something that can produce more value than the sum of its parts. Basic definitions. I'm not an economist. I'm not, a trader or any of those anything along those lines. But I think it's valuable to kind of set these things in that, because when we start to think about the wide swings that Bitcoin has, I think it's looking for a way to ground its value in something. And then if you think of the whole economic world that we're in modern business, or like the market or the stock exchange and all that kind of stuff, is like, what are most things grounded in? And it made me feel like the clarifying ethic of all those things feels not clarifying. And the thought occurred to me is, what is the most valuable thing in the universe? And the conclusion that I came to, and part of that is in relationship with you and with others and things like that, is that really love is the most valuable thing in the universe. I think if I lost all material possession and even the ability to eat or, have those, love would still be the preferred thing I would choose over all those things. And therefore, it's not only an end in itself, it's a means through things as well. So love being the most precious thing in the universe. And it occurred to me that we don't actually peg the value of things to love.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you think of a phone, it's like it has some degree of pegging something towards my ability to love and to receive love, in that it's a communications device. So as I'm at work, I can phone my wife and I can see my loved one in technology allows me to extend my senses in a way so that love can be extended, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it also can distract me from love. You know, a phone also helps me to doom scroll and just escape reality and escape my presence and not be able to love in the moment. And when we think of what is the value of a phone company, you know, we're not tying it to the capacity to love. We're kind of tying it to a whole bunch of things, of which love is a part of it, or the promise of love is a part of it. But then it ends up being tied to a whole bunch of different things.
Yeah.
So I want to take, you know, that idea of like, what are we tying value to? And then I want to bring together the idea of what is money. And for the sake of this dialogue, I want to define money as a technology and a tool that helps facilitate the exchange of value. And so if you grow wheat and I raise cows for beef, instead of me saying, here's a quarter cow, like how much wheat is that worth that, you know, we can exchange because I need wheat and you need some beef. And then now we just have wheat and beef. And now we also need, you know, milk from the dairy farmer, and we need, you know, bricks to build the house. And so instead of us all just trading independently, that becomes very difficult. So instead, money is a technology that can sit in between those transactions in order to facilitate the exchange of value.
Mm-hmm.
And so seeing it as a tool. Any
I think that's
okay.
good. Yeah.
And so now as we come back into the series on work, is we have this fundamental question, is how am I thinking about money and relating to money as it comes into the places of work and the planning of work and the use of the tool.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it's valuable to start in the clarifying question is, I think a lot of people see money as an end in and of itself.
Mm-hmm.
And how do we break out of that knowledge and then start to think about money and vocation as we enter into meaningful places of employment and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll set that up.
Yeah.
And what are some of your immediate thoughts?
Well, my immediate thought is that's a great setup.
Oh, thank you.
I appreciate the clarification of money as a tool. I think that's an important way to bring the matter into this space and to set it down inside of the larger matter of clarifying our work and understanding what calling amounts to in that space as well. And it's also important when we're talking about money to clarify what wealth is.
Mm.
And we can maybe get to that a little further down the line. But the notion that money itself becomes problematic when it isn't tethered to something real, I think that's a very important principle to begin with. And there are state actors and legislators that make those determinations, right? The decoupling of the dollar from a real commodity, you know, decoupling it from gold. It has the consequences baked into it that you're alluding to in your preamble to our dialogue here. And a fiat currency, of course, is one that is vulnerable to the whims of people and their interests, and doesn't have a security against people and their interests, however sordid or properly organized those are. And so it's more vulnerable to inflation, et cetera, et cetera. And that's the world that we've inherited. We decoupled what we represent as money from things that are real in the natural order, and that there is a fixed store of, right? And by fixed, we are able to come up with some realistic measure of. And so then we find ourselves in a bit of trouble there. But the consideration about what has ultimate value, right? In economic terms, the world has tended to think about that in terms of precious minerals and elements, and gold has been the de facto currency marker for as long as we can remember. And we've gone through other iterations of that too, of course, right? At one point, tulip bulbs were a massive currency or store of wealth and measure of wealth. In prison contexts in the US, when guys talk about how many Macs they have, a Mac is a mackerel packet, and it gets traded as currency around the canteen. It's the fish substance that the inmates don't want to eat and they want to trade for. In the old days, it was cigarettes. These days, it's contraband and other things. But what has real value is such an important question. And it's a life and death matter at the end of the day, because what has real value is what I can live off of, right? What has artificial value is inconsequential. It's not going to kill me if I don't have it, and it's not going to save me if I do. But real value, life and death hang in the balance of that. So that's an important question. And the articulation of love being the highest good, I think, is the best way to go about considering that. I think that's a proper setup to the matter. So placing love before people's thoughts as something to reconcile with. First, maybe to come up with a definition for, if you don't have one, because you may think of love as something that's a little different than the amorous feelings that you have for the person that you have moderate attraction to. Love gets bandied about in our culture in a way that doesn't do it much service and can't do us much service. And so if by what we mean by love is, we take from another term, benevolence, right? Benevolence, will to good. Love is the intention to will somebody's good and my committed determination to securing that for them. And family is a good place to think about how this grows legs and becomes a practical concern. If you love your child, you are ordering your life around what is good for their sake. And you're deploying your resources in their direction for them. That's probably the clearest picture that we can come up with for what we're talking about when we say love. We're not talking about a feeling. We're talking about the act of utilizing what resource you have, personal, material, spiritual, psychological, etc., in order to better the life of the one near you, better your neighbor's life. And it ends up being the case that none of us can survive without that, right? So all that to say, I think the setup for the dialogue is good. And I agree with it.
That's good. We're in agreement. I want to go back and just clarify, just in case somebody doesn't have any economic history understanding, but all currency around the world used to be pegged to the gold standard, right? And what that meant is you the amount of gold you had as a currency definer, like a country or government, was what your currency was worth.
Yep.
And so when we moved away from that, we allowed central banks to determine their own currency and for them to be able to increase the volume of it by money printing.
And
right?
that's what we mean by fiat.
Yeah. And the idea of that is like, oh, now the value of money becomes manipulatable because I can just have more. And, if, like in the prison, if all of a sudden some inmate got, all these
max,
smuggled into them, and there was just more money in the system because the external world is not trading on max, like somebody could go and buy a whole bunch of max and sneak it into, theoretically.
That's right.
Then all of a sudden, what a Mac used to buy you before is like, well, there's way more of this and there's the same amount of goods. And that's what happens with inflation, right? That's
right.
And so
real things cost more and fiat money means less.
Yes.
Right? Is valueless.
Yeah.
In that dynamic. In an inflationary market, your dollars are worth less and things are costing more.
Yeah.
And real value is proven in that space by what ends up being the thing that people want the most and thereby becomes the most expensive in that inflationary market.
Yes. And this might be a complicated thought, so you help me under that. Help me explain it. What happens when money is not inherently tied to something real? The vulnerability that you were talking about earlier is for ideology to end up determining value. And the problem with ideology is that it is only a portion of the whole or the truth. And so we end up valuing things that aren't holistically tied to reality either. And sometimes tied to non-reality, if that makes sense. So,
well, you're also left with another problem there. Okay, gold. There's a fixed amount of it in the earth. We can't produce more of it. We can only discover, and it has this real value that has proven itself over time. Decoupled from that, or something like it in its place, we have the problem of arbitration that you just named, but we also have a secondary problem, and that is centralization. Who gets to decide what the value of the currency is? And are the people making those decisions trustworthy? Right? And so you end up having compound problems that are added the longer you go without any currency tethered to real value. You're left to more and more of the whims of governors in that space. And around the turn of the 20th century, a group of men in a place called Jekyll Island formed the Federal Reserve Bank, and ever since have been pulling strings along those very lines in a pretty shadowy sense. And most people don't have an awareness of those dynamics that affect them daily. And so just to put in front of people's minds how important all of this is, if you're not tethered to something real, you're going to be tethered to something illusory, something, like you said, like an ideology. And if the ideas aren't guided by reliable principles, then people are going to suffer a great deal. at the whims of the governors who don't have a clarified view for why they're doing what they're doing beyond their own benefit. And that proves itself in history over and over again. So all of this matters very, very much.
Yeah, and most people listening aren't in politics, I imagine, or maybe a few of them are. But the idea is like, okay, well, that's great. There's this, we're trying to describe what money is, but how does this relate to how I enter into my workplace? And I think part of that is going, okay, how do you help your work align to true value for how value exchanges your labor or your the creating of product, so which is also labor into something. Sometimes we sell our labor directly for money, and sometimes we accumulate things into a resource and sell that for money. And sometimes we're actually just in the commodity trading business where that's maybe more complicated. So, so then I'm thinking like, okay, we talked about vocation last episode. So if you haven't listened, this, a refresher on what vocation is the way that you were made to love is a very oversimplified version of what we talked about last time. So go listen to the other episode. But when I'm entering into work and trying to say, who am I? How am I made to love? And how do I bring that into a place where I'm exchanging the gift of who I am and the gift of my calling to the world? And what does that exchange look like? And how do I start to discern that exchange in reality? Yeah, you able to kind of pick it up from there, or do you want me to
keep going?
So I think the problem that besets, especially in earlier parts of your career, but maybe, in later parts of career as well, is this idea of like, how am I contributing to anything, and how am I compensated for that? And how do I enter into those arrangements in a way that's not contributing more to the problem, but actually entering into it that is meaningful and gainful employment, right? Or a gainful venture into maybe starting your own company or doing things like that. And the question is how do I enter into that where I can have sustained peace? Because I have found myself in different parts of my life just headlong entering into something for the pursuit of money as a means in and of itself. And that got me twisted up in all sorts of ways where I couldn't quite find a way to move forward meaningfully. It felt like I was always almost chasing my own tail until the clarity of the matter came, where it's like, oh, I'm trying to bring my way of loving the world as vocation to bear in a way that actually produces real value, and then getting an exchange on that side. Does that clarify?
Yeah. What happened for you that begot that change? Maybe that can help people as we're teasing out some of these themes, to put it inside of a real story, someone's autobiography.
Yeah, I think part of the thing is when you don't have a clarification of what money actually is, that it is a tool. It's it's a technology. It's not an end in and of itself. And I felt I was chasing it as an end in and of itself for the sake of, you and I have had conversations about this, but as an end in and of itself, I'm just trying to chase the accumulation of it to, your words are, hedge against chance, so that I'm not vulnerable in case something happens to me. And that becomes, the more stockpile of money that I can accumulate, the safer I feel in some sense.
Right.
But that isn't a clarifying ethic in and of itself. And so the thing that changed for me is I don't, the problem that comes before that without clarity is how you accumulate the money then starts to be problematic. Money for money's sake means I enter into a giant game of manipulation. And what I mean by that is now it's about how we can work the flow of money so that it comes to me more easily. And I'm not as generous with the flow of it out there. And so the flow into me is greater than the flow out. And you end up trying to control for that. But have you ever been in a deal where somebody's trying to work it that way? And you're like, okay, well, this doesn't seem fair, or you're going to get a better part of this value exchange than I am. Ends up being a frustrating way to go through life. And when you're not clarified on why it ought to be other than that, or when you say, oh, everyone is just working in that model, which I think most of modern business is like, hey, how can I structure the deal to my advantage all the time?
Yeah, for sure.
It ends up being like your ability to rig the system to your advantage is what everyone's doing. And
that's a fact.
And it ends up being, it ends up not being a fun way to do life, to say the least.
Yeah.
And at some point you end up with people who have more leverage. And so what you end up bringing to the table is not appreciated. And that can hurt. Or you end up knowing that you have the leverage and then you're using that sense of power that you have over the person. And that doesn't feel good on this side. And so the awareness of that and the refusal to do some of it, but not really, figuring out where that ethic really lied, or lay, I should say, ends up being, as somebody who wants to do good, it just ended up being very complicated. And the thing that broke for me and kind of really allowed me to establish way more of a coherent walk through life is that love became the central ethic of I'm going to exchange love in doing that. And maybe a way to demonstrate, and I do want to acknowledge, like, a lot of this is conversations that you and I have had. So these aren't my ideas. I want to give you the honor of like introducing me to some of these for sure. Is where I situated the exchange of value. And if I situated the exchange of value on the front end and said, hey, I want/need, and I'll just use a big round number. I want $1 million, And then I say, who has $1 million? Oh, these people have $1 million. They have the capacity to give $1 million. Now, what do they want? And being in a collective of people who are, have, they're capacious, they have high capacity, we can fill a lot of what people want. But it's not necessarily who I am or how I was made to love. It's just something that I can do. And if you take $1 million or any amount of money from somebody on one side, then you have to actually try and fill the value on the back end of it. And so you end up in this problem where you experience a value gap in you. You're like, am I meeting the value? I said I need the money. They said yes. And now I've got to fulfill that value. And I'm unsure if that value is being fulfilled inside of me.
Right.
And what ends up happening in that is things like burnout, because you're not sure where to stop, because it's not clarified exchange up front.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not discerned of what it's worth.
Mm-hmm.
And the alternative is you figure out vocationally, who am I and what do I actually have in me through the gifts and capacities that I have, but also the call that I have and the way I was made to love, and the experiences that I have that do actually help someone.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's it, this is who I am, and then people who have that need say, this is my need, and then you say, can I fulfill that or meet that need with the actual thing that I have, and then discerning what the value of that thing is at the end of it.
Yeah.
Between the two parties as a discernment, and to some degree in negotiation, but not in the terms of
Who's going to win?
Who's going to win?
That's right.
But a discernment being collaborative versus a negotiation being non-collaborative.
Yeah.
Or oppositional.
Yeah.
That just found to be a way more fruitful and fulfilling way to do business. And even in the, I'll call it a sales process, it became, when you're selling to somebody, I think selling is just so ubiquitous that we're kind of used to it.
Right.
But no one actually enjoys being sold to.
Unless the person that they're with is telling the truth. I love being sold to by people who care about the product that they have and believe in it. I hate being sold to by someone who's lying through their teeth to me. And the majority of sales are the latter. And it's because of what the majority of business is.
And sometimes somebody can be telling the truth about something and selling you, but you know that they're doing it for their sake and not for yours.
Yep. Yeah,
and
all of that comes into that space.
And so it could be the thing you need, but even the way you're being introduced into the need, you feel like, you're like, I don't know if this is for me or for them.
That's right.
And it's just so much. I might have to clarify, I have a need and I want that thing, and I'll put up with this way of selling
right
in order to, get the thing that I need.
Yeah. Yeah, so can we imagine sales that doesn't involve bearing false witness or manipulation of any kind? It's a fair question to ask. And if love isn't your ethic, then you're left to something other than love to guide you. And what's on that list has a difficult time benefiting people in a way that lasts and in a way that can serve the whole. So I think these are all important considerations, Jason. I think it also invites that we clarify what wealth is, because the aspiration toward wealth is where most young people begin their considerations on all of this. They don't sit down at the age of 20 and think to themselves, how am I going to bring value to the world based on what they're taught in school and in business admin classes, etc. They think about, how can I get the largest piece of the pie and somehow fit integrity into that. I'm not saying that all of these business schools are sordid in all of their aims, but you'd be hard-pressed to find one that's clarified in their ethic. Can I imagine selling something to somebody and only telling the truth? Can I imagine crafting a deal where I actually intend the good of the one that I'm in business with? Can I imagine making a product that is going to cost me on the production side because I'm doing everything I can to make it the best that it can be? And maybe it's going to steal from my margins on the other side, but I'm committed to that because I want people to have something that lasts and that they can use. That's what we're talking about, just to make it practical when we're asking what love would invite as the core ethic in such spaces. And moving through all of that, can I do it as myself? Can I not bear false witness about who I am in the process? And that sounds like a bit of a dream when you put all of that in front of people's minds and hearts. Showing up in my work, not bearing false witness, deploying my gifts and capacities into the space, building or establishing or developing products and services that actually have value, and selling those in a way that never severs me from the needs of the one that I'm selling to. Those are the kinds of things that love produces in us when we surrender to love as our ethic, when we do what love invites and we refuse what fear demands. And that's important to clarify. If we don't bring it down into those territories, love can sound like a very whimsical kind of dynamic to be hanging your hat on, right? But that's what we mean. So all of this matters at that level. All of this matters at the level of your personhood and your fulfillment and your provision and everybody else's. And if love isn't your ethic, then what is? That's a question to get in front of people's minds. And the ethic is going to be some form of aspiration that's marked by greed. I think it was Michael Douglas who played Wolf of Wall Street the first time. And there's a famous quote from that film: greed is good. Right? I can't remember the rest of it, but that's about all you need to know. These aren't just cinematic depictions of, fantasy genre. These are the way things play out on Wall Street and the way that things play out in the spaces where people live and move and have their being. They leave their home, they go do this shit, and then they go back to their home. And they have to put their head on the pillow at the end of the day and ask themselves the question: did what I engaged in today, did it matter, for one? Did it honor the people that I was with? Or did I sell a part of myself and compromise what was good for them in order to get a little more myself? And what kind of person am I becoming in that process as I do so on repeat over and over and over again? And how desensitized am I becoming to that as my way, my manner of living? And I think the answer for a lot of people there is extremely desensitized.
And you're going to bring that desensitization into post-work
That's right.
relationships
That's
that
right.
really matter to you.
Yeah. So then that begs the question: what kind of person am I becoming through my work? What is left of me? If I imagine following this path, because we like to choose our amnesia. We like to forget on purpose our transgressions, the ones that convenience us in the accumulation of what we've thought of as wealth. And, under the statement that business is business,
Or it's just business.
I'll do it for today, right? Or I'll do it in this instance. I'll cut that corner, or I'll throw shade on that person to try and advantage myself. And before you know it, you've had 40 of those days, or 4 of those years, or 40 of those years. And who are you at the end of all of that? And so work is always tethered to not only our provision, but our personhood. And the kind of person we're becoming is guided along by the small decisions we make in the spaces where that term shows up, or that phrase, business is business. And in the way that it's most commonly meted out into the world, people say that immediately before they're about to do something wrong. Just this once. And then they do it again. And then you have a scandal with a medical services company that fudges their research because their market cap was shrinking. Or you have Volkswagen, one of the largest corporations in the world, lying about their emissions rating in order to have a little more. And you think, what was all of that for? What did you gain out of that? Did you increase the size of your pool? Like, what was it that you were gunning for? And most people wouldn't be able to answer that question. They're just following a host of compulsions as their daily work. And people get chewed up and spit out the other end of that. And most of what we call modern commerce, unfortunately, and not to be filled with doom here, but let's tell the truth together. Most of what has become modern commerce is just that. So, when we're talking about love as a guiding ethic, we're talking about brass tacks. We're talking about the only other viable option that could possibly stand a hope of changing things, of turning that ship around. If I'm not merely aspiring to the accumulation of more from myself, then the alternative is to say, well, how can I take care of my and others' needs? And we're not talking about communism here. We're talking about responsibility, loving responsibility. And we're meant to do not just normal work, we're meant to do profound things. And people are made for profundity, profound creativity, profound generosity, profound innovation. And the best of those are the ones that didn't harm anybody en route to the goal.
Yeah, I think part of being a human being is if you're not oriented to love, creativity does suffer. And creativity is one of the human faculties that actually allows us to create things that are valuable.
Mm-hmm.
I think in, Dakota, who works here, he, as he's oriented to love, he actually will create better designs.
No
because
doubt.
if he's thinking, oh, how does the person who's going to receive this, how do I care for them in real terms? And that could be Pierre and Dakota both work here, but they're thinking in the sense of design as an example, a very clear example. How do I make this easier for somebody to, follow and find? And how do I make something actually beautiful so that they would, enjoy spending time here? Or how to articulate this in visual language so that this is digestible for somebody to be able to take it in and apply it to whatever context they find themselves. How do I help draw them into something that is true from the craft that I have? Like that motivation will actually lead to better design.
It will for sure lead to better design.
And the opposite, if you go, oh man, I'm working for this, this corporation, and they're asking me to use the gifts that I have to manipulate somebody on the other end to buy this product that I'm not 100% sure in. Do you think that is for any amount of time going to help that person produce a more creative thing as it sits within them, right, as a way of meaning, of like being productive?
Well, we'd have to test that against the backdrop of the products and services that do dominate the market. And that's maybe a valuable thought experiment. And one of the places that we do that is to say, well, were the developers of whether it's Facebook or Instagram or TikTok, were they creative in their development? The answer to that pretty immediately is yes.
Mm-hmm.
Were they brilliant? Yes. Eh? Did they display competence? Yes. But what were they provably oriented to? The capture of your mind. They're all on record saying that was our ethic from the jump. We found something called an algorithm. In fact, we developed it. And instead of your well-being, what we had in mind was your possession. From the beginning, we had in mind that we would capture your interests for the rest of time.
And your attention.
And your attention, by virtue of your attention,
Mm-hmm.
your most potentially important commodity, your attention. And we would seek to imprison you there inside of the range of our domains. Our company, our products and services, our partners, etc. And that is an extremely effective motivation to have, as has been proven by the number of subscribers that these enormous companies have been able to win through those methods. But then we have the consequences, and I think this is an important thing, again, to play the tape out to the end of. How many of the developers of those very technologies who themselves have children will allow the use of those technologies in their own homes? And several of them are on record saying, mea culpa, woe is me, I'm sorry I ever made this thing. Or at least that's what they say publicly. Okay? And so if we're developing products and services that we would forbid our own children to use, then what are we telling the world about who we are in characterological terms? And to move away from the doomsday aspects of that, what would we say to such a person once they had discovered that their innovation had caused the intellectual, psychological, and spiritual capture of an entire population of people? We would, I hope, put before them that they were actually meant to use these glowing gifts and capacities they have, the very ones that they submitted into these sordid interests, for different reasons, to benefit you. It'd be possible to develop a social media apparatus that could serve the population. And no doubt it could. You and your team are developing technologies like that as we speak. Okay? But love is your ethic. And it isn't always the fastest path to material wealth, but it is the most reliable path to wealth itself, if we define what wealth is properly.
Yeah, and not have a fraction of what wealth is and call it the whole.
That's right.
So if we define wealth purely as the gaining of material goods, i.e. amassing money and things, but instead put it in terms of what relationships do I have? What family do I have? What is the closest bonds that I have in terms of relationship like marriage? What is my broader community like? What experiences am I able to enter into because of these things? And sometimes money can buy some of those experiences too. So it can get trickier even in that aspect. But how would you add to a broader sense of what wealth is?
Yeah, I would maybe suggest that wealth is simply inversely correlated with unmet wants.
Okay.
Okay. And the definition of wealth is tricky against that backdrop, but just hang with me here and see if we can come up with something clear to put before people. If it's inversely correlated with the number of wants that you still have, what that means is wealth is a measure of contentment. Now, I think of my mother-in-law as a wealthy person. Okay? She raised 3 children as a single mother. She works in a administrative role in a medium-sized church in a very small town in the southern U.S. And she is surrounded by people who adore her and whom she adores. And she does not make an enormous salary, but she is one of the most contented women I've ever come across, or people for that matter. And she has the love of her grandchildren and her children and their respect. She has what she needs every single day in terms of her physical provision. Her home is secured for her through her long labors. She is in a dynamic relationship, in a well-practiced spirituality with her God and with her faith community. She is in want of nothing. And many would look at her and say she doesn't have much. But a proper view of her is that she has everything. Wealth is inversely correlated with the number of unmet wants that we yet have or still have. And that is as much a condition of the mind and heart matter as it is a factual assessment or appraisal of what you have versus what somebody else does. Wealth means not needing anything. And wealth also means being able to move out into the world and engage the world on its terms in the ways that I need in order to continue to prosper and to flourish as a human being. Am I able to navigate the world properly? If so, I'm wealthy, right? Now, I know a lot of people who have material goods at an exponent of what you or I have, and so do you. And you will have noticed, I'm sure, we've talked about it before, the interesting paradox woven into everything we're talking about. If wealth is a measure of an inverse correlation between the number of remaining wants that I have and my overall condition, then it has to be noted that some of the most materially wealthy people that you ever meet are the most discontented, the most nerve-wracked, threadbare, frenzied personalities you'll ever encounter. And they have tigers by the tail that they have to continue to serve in order to maintain their status in that space. Now, is that a wealthy person? Hey, you make an appraisal of such a life over the whole lifespan and get to whatever year they are in when they breathe their last. If that individual looks back upon that life and they've got 10 vehicles in a garage that could hold twice as many, in a home that, could house a small community, and they spent no time with their offspring, they burned every bridge they had because they stepped on the throats of their business partners. What do they have in the end? And in some senses, these are tropes until we look at them in the real lived context. And in the real lived context, all it takes is being around a dinner table in one of these homes and seeing the chaos in the marriage, or the number of these men who are the most insecure individuals that you could conceive of meeting in a nice Armani suit, to know what the real situation is. They're not wealthy. They're impoverished. The wealthy one is the contented one, the one who is navigating the world in ways that work for that individual and is at peace in their relationships and has what they need in order to live another day. I would suggest to you that that's a wealthy person. And there's a dichotomy here between eternal things and temporal things that also needs to be spoken of. The Christian scriptures inside of the statements of Jesus record him as saying, "Don't store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy. Okay? But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven." Well, what could that possibly mean? But to build in terms of things that last, and those end up being what are good for me and the people I'm in relationship with. And I can't serve into that by being somebody else. So that means I'm going to have to figure out who I am, what resources are in me, and I'm going to work hard at growing those so that I can offer more of them. I can take care of more. And I'm a wealthy person by that definition. Am I able to take care of the needs of others with them? And so somehow in all of that, we're retooling an understanding of what good work might be and what value exchange looks like, and imagining what economics could look like as well. And I would submit to you that that sounds, and in fact is, a better place to be than what we've got on issue right now. Apparently, the aspirations of the rulers of this world can't prevent them from walking right through the door into more and more war, because war ends up being the thing that allows them to continue to profit themselves in these material terms that we've talked about as the alternatives to love. So war is the other option on the table if love isn't your ethic. And that's the long end to the alternatives to love.
Yeah, that seemed like a logic jump, but let me try and fill that out.
Sure.
And you correct me where, or there's a skip. I experienced a skip in that.
You
But
bet.
if it ends up just being a game of manipulation and greed and the things that we talked about earlier in the conversation, and I'm willing to do business with you as long as it benefits me,
Mm-hmm.
and then when that doesn't happen, then we cut each other off. That only creates in the human heart a will to power.
That's right.
And because, oh, you hurt me. And so to the person who has the most strength or the most leverage or the most, cunning manipulation of a situation, that person's the one who wins. That becomes the end in that is power, right? Or control, or what that means. And so working into places, if I go all the way up the chain into that, it ends up that one group is trying to amass as much control so that they can have advantage over their other human neighbor.
Mm-hmm.
And if the other person matches that with trying to, then we just end up in a state where it's power versus power, and that always leads to war at the end of that.
Mm-hmm.
Sooner or later,
Mm-hmm.
it's war. Is that the alternative if it's not love?
Yeah.
Yeah, I bet people aren't thinking about that when they're in job interviews.
Not usually.
And so how does that apply when somebody's saying, hey, Pete, I'm in a bad economy here. Like I need food on my table. I just need to kind of take something, like we're in a place right now where I saw an article where almost all LinkedIn jobs have over 100 applicants, 100 plus applicants.
Mm.
And so I'm like,
That's a fascinating metric. Yeah.
Well, and it's
And
painful,
a harrowing one.
right?
Yeah.
And I heard a story. A friend of a friend, a connection he's a developer and he's looking to change course because of the advent of AI and the displacing of his position. And he said he saw one job that had 700 plus applicants. He said that's bigger than my high school. So I'm competing with everyone else in high school for one job. And there's a whole host of reasons for that. But the idea of like, how do I meaningfully enter into the workforce, into all of this? It feels like, how do we go from the grand problem that's leading to war? And how do we situate somebody into, hey, here's how you enter into that as you're looking for employment?
Yeah. Well, if we're talking about a young person, you're going to have to you're going to have to enter into some spaces in order to discover the fit between your aptitudes and that line of work. If you have if you're in a scenario where that is an option on the table. But even if it's not, even if it's something that doesn't feel creatively connected to the unique genius that's in you, inside of the personality you were gifted at birth and what you've cultivated in that personality to benefit others by. And a lot of people don't start with the privilege of, can I go and find a creative fit with my passions?
Mm-hmm.
You're nonetheless going to have to show up as a self, though, in that work. And so what ethic is going to guide you in the work as you're exploring it? And a lot of times, in the absence of a clarified workflow or a clarified personhood, right, we have to define things by what we're not going to do. And a commitment to not compromising anybody else's honor in the work that you're doing, as a general rule, is a good place for a young person to start. I refuse to dishonor another person for my gain. Okay, that's stepping us down the road in the direction of love. Okay, so let's keep that, right? And I'm going to show up in my place of employment with an orientation to service. Like I'm actually going to try to bless the people in my immediate sphere, my workmates, etc. I refuse to step on the throat of anybody for the sake of personal advancement. Those ethics are going to serve me long term because I'm going to have to find a way to do the work and perhaps witness other people move past me more quickly than I advance in that space. And so I'm hedging a long-term gain against their short-term gain here. And once I'm tested in those spaces, I'm going to tend to be met by the opportunity for more responsibility. Because while my workmates may be stepping on the throat of me and everybody else besides, real value is proven as itself in the end. Real integrity is proven as itself in the end. It may not seem like it in the short term, but it's always the case. Okay? It's Schopenhauer's dictum. All truth passes through three phases. First, it's ridiculed. then it's violently opposed, then it's accepted as self-evident. You and I have both been in positions where we've been in work environments. I worked in blue-collar spaces for a long time, but I saw this just as much in the psychological community as I entered into that as a professional as well. And people wanting to curry favor with the right people in power in order to get their research interests advanced more quickly than their colleagues in their faculty, for example. Corruption is corruption by whatever clothing it's got on. And to speak to a young person and encourage them to keep their heart, to keep their integrity in that space, and to regard this as a long-term living investment that they're making. Okay, what treasure are you building in here as you show up and you do your job? And in time, what's happening is you may not be aligned in your creative dynamics in your work, but something much more valuable in the immediate sense is happening. You're becoming a trustworthy person. You're becoming someone that others can depend on, and you can't fake that. Okay? The untrustworthy person is going to reliably do one thing: let you down. They're going to lie, cheat, steal, right?
Mm-hmm.
Slander, etc. Are you becoming that kind of self? Do you want to take the risk of rolling that out over 5 or 10 years of employment and career? Who are you becoming? Okay? That is the job inside of every job.
Mm-hmm.
And the ones who in the end are granted responsibility are the ones who have taken the little that they had and done something beautiful with it. And I'm just echoing the words of Jesus here, that those who are faithful in little things will be faithful in big things down the road. And they will be granted more in terms of responsibility. Okay? The effect of choosing the ethic of love for any individual is that they become more of a responsible agent. They become a more capacious person. You want to become a more capacious person, which just means capacitated to be able to do things reliably. Okay? Just endeavor to love well. And there's no space, there's no corner of the universe where that is not a viable consideration, where that is not something that will contribute to your well-being in the long term. So weigh it carefully. And there are probably people out there who know exactly what I'm talking about as I say it, because they've compromised. They drank the Kool-Aid, right? Early on, they thought, no, I really want that Lamborghini. I think that'd be fun to be the guy on the block who's got a Lamborghini. I'm going to get to the Lamborghini as quickly as I can.
Well, and that having the Lamborghini might meet my needs.
That's right.
That's
right.
That's the myth.
And everyone who has aspired to that with that as their ethic has found the truth of that matter.
Yes.
It's true.
Well,
It's true.
I'll tell you when I have a Lamborghini.
Okay.
No, I'm just kidding.
Okay.
But it's a, joking aside, it's a hollow pursuit that we know,
and
right?
it's
And it
nothing
proves that
again-
when we...
I'm not talking about that nobody should purchase Lamborghinis.
No,
right?
it might be that it's actually a beautifully crafted... Somebody has a vocation to make
Absolutely.
Lamborghinis, and they're beautiful.
Absolutely.
But we're mentioning it as the means of itself to say, hey, if I get the Lambo, I might get the girl, and then I might be popular enough, I might fill the thing.
Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And if it's not with people and their betterment, then it's with everything else. And so if people and their betterment isn't at the center of what you're doing, you're going to be causing a problem in the world.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a fact. And if you're a young person, if you're a young man, full of piss and vinegar, you got a lot of talent but it hasn't been tested in the domains of life where all of this matters. Maybe you were lauded for your talent and you came to trust in that. You're the star athlete and the star student. Right? But have you been tested by having to serve somebody beyond yourself yet? If you're young, the answer is probably no, unless you came into hardship early, and then God bless you. You're well situated already because you've had to carry something that mattered, right?
And one of the, as you're talking about, I love what you're saying in the sense of there's any time you're in any sort of job, becoming more trustworthy is great. And one of the things that we've talked about here, and my brother-in-law Samuel, him and I talked about this. He introduced this kind of framework to me. But when we think about trust and trustworthiness, we saw there's three components to it. And you can think about, you can grow in any one of these trust, and you want to have, if it's a triangle, you want to develop as much surface area as you can. And you don't want an anemic triangle that's like, with one of the angles is acute. But the 3 points of the triangle would be, one is goodwill, and I think that's where service comes in. Like, do I actually will the good of another? Am I wanting the best for people? And so we can look at somebody and go, oh, do I trust that they want my good? Right? That's goodwill. And then we can say the other point of the triangle, or the triad, or whatever you want to say, would be competence, right? And becoming trustworthy is to say, look, when I hand them something, I'm going to get a good thing back.
That's right.
In the thing. So, and sometimes in certain jobs, like, hey, the competence in this thing has a ceiling, but I can still work on the other two pieces. And the third one in that triad would be integrity. Am I able to hold the whole thing together as a unity? Or one example of that is, hey, the person has goodwill and they're competent, but they don't show up, right? They're not there on time. They're sometimes, they call in sick when they're not sick, or, like all those things. And you're like, man, that's also an area that I can't trust into, even though it's, and so goodwill, competence, and integrity. And sometimes we can't grow our competence in a certain situation, or sometimes we have competence and we have to learn how to show up consistently all the time, and maybe even more than what's expected, right? That might be another thing. Or show the goodwill, and the idea of I would way rather hire somebody who is trustworthy in those three dimensions.
Yes, you would.
Than anything else, right? And just because they can get the job done doesn't mean that you want them. You want them to have equal parts in all those three as they expand themselves.
Yeah.
The other thing that I just, I was reminded of as we were talking is the idea of so much of the modern workplace is us not showing up as ourselves.
Yes. Yeah, that was part of last episode.
Yeah. And just to link it back to that is, how many times are we in a business context where the unspoken rules are you show up, you do your work, and then life happens outside of work, right? Like life-giving things happen outside of work, versus can I show up to work as my personality? Can I show up and be me? And obviously the context calls for different things when you're at work than when you're at your friend. But personality is flexible and it's expansive. What we don't want to do is show up and just say, well, that's work and I'm going to leave it there. Because it bifurcates us as human beings, where if I can't be present as me at work, surprise, surprise, I can't be present at me at home or me in my community or
Yeah.
friends or whatever that is. So
Yeah.
I just think that's another important part. Just as an aside, as we think of like how to show up, and uh, the reason I think that might be valuable as it relates to the idea of the exchange of value is we want to. I think there's meaning and purpose being needed as me, and that's where when somebody says, "Oh, I want Pete to help me with this. I
Mhm.
want Jason to help me with this. I would love for, you know, Dakota or like they would be really good at this." As opposed to I'm generically skilled or I have generic competence, I have
Yeah.
generic integrity. It's actually no, this person has their own vocation there. And then it can be a very different discernment as to the gifting of value.
Mhm.
I actually think it's a multiplier, right?
It's a great thought experiment that you're inviting there. If I can just
Yeah.
riff with that just a little bit and carry it down the line just one more step.
Mm-hmm.
You're naming these people, and in the map of your mind, as a business owner and as the leader of an organization, you have certain people in mind to do particular things. And then they come to mind right now. Oh, I've got this job I need to do. Oh, I need that guy. I need that woman. Okay. Um, this is a Colleen job, right?
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean? That means they've proven their capacity in a way that you can't help but to trust. And I can't help but to think about the young people, right? The early 20s. And in part that's um, it's so tethered to my heart because I know that my oldest child is in that space right now. They are the future, you
Mm-hmm.
know, they really are. And a question to put before them is, am I becoming the kind of person right now? Am I endeavoring to become the kind of person whom others would call upon in need? Okay. That's such an important thing to think about as I'm on the front end of a career path. Do I determine to become the sort of people that others think of and know as reliably competent and integral in this general field of work where I think I might want to put my shoulder to the wheel and forge a career in that's connected to my calling? And I think what you're saying is so true. When people hold those considerations in mind, the workspace becomes uh, this spectrum of creativity. And a good metaphor for it that is uh, something that we all live with and have to contend with is that the alternative to it is people hiding who they are, uh, keeping that at bay during their working hours, and only listening to the alternatives on hand, the quarterly earnings, the appeasement of shareholders, and everything begins to look like everything else in that space, the people and the products. And then what do you have? You've got another oppressive box center that you're driving by on a highway with a Chipotle and a Opa and a whatever as the offerings on hand that we call merchants. And they're all owned by the same company. And they're all producing the same thing with one little twist or one little spin. Why? Because they're not tethered to vocation anymore. They're not tethered to the wellspring of life in the individual creator and the innovation that shows up in that space when that individual creator is asking about the needs and the interests of their neighbor for their neighbor's sake. When you think about only doing what the bottom line demands of you, you get these oppressive monoliths that are sterile offerings to us. They can't nurture us, either by their beauty, because they're not, or by their consumables,
nutrition,
because they don't nurture us. So you get McDonald's, right? That's what you get. And think about what is the person version of a McDonald's. And you run into a lot of those. And every one of them to a person is miserable because they've got all of this potential energy in them that isn't being exercised into the world in the way that it's meant to be exercised. And I think people are tired of that. And they prove that in the compulsions that they pick up because they're not nurtured. So this has a cascading effect. And we've witnessed in live time and with increased pace the cascading effect away from love. And what we're talking about here is sequestering some of that, stopping the traffic for a moment and going, what could this be otherwise? And what would the necessary ingredients be in the production of those kinds of people and that kind of product and that kind of service?
And I even think, I don't want you and I to get stuck in like the theory of it. You know, we enjoy that and we want to ground it. So I'm going to say, even if you're working at a McDonald's right now as a young person,
no doubt,
right? You can start to practice all of this.
That's what we were talking about last episode too.
And you can say, I'm going to be a joy to be around on the cooking line, right? I'm going to do my work. I'm going to do it hard, but I'm going to be a joy, you know? And maybe that's my gift of humor. Maybe that's my gift of being kind and encouraging. You know, there's all these beautiful things that you can be even in any context. And as a person who has employed people almost my whole adult life and done maybe hundreds of interviews, the thing that I'm looking for, and I think most places you want to work are looking for, is that trustworthiness. Right? And is this person going to show up? Or is their attitude going to be there? In the right place that they want to contribute to something versus am I negotiating for like, how much do I have to give you to keep you here? Right? And sometimes discernments lead people in and out of places. Like, don't get me wrong. And sometimes mistakes that leaders make also do that. So I'm not only saying that's the only factor, but as it relates to the subject we're trying to talk about today is money and work. Or the exchange of value and work. I think a lot of that is like, I want to pay people who are able to take on responsibility that creates more gift and value into the immediate team, because some jobs are like more supporting roles and some jobs are like external creation of value roles. But when somebody's continually contributing to that, they negotiate higher salaries. There's many times you're like, this person is going to be a team player. This person is teachable. This person has a hunger to grow and express themselves in healthy ways.
And all that has real lasting value to my organization and to the products and services we're trying to develop.
And to the organizations that we're looking to serve. That's like, can I put this person in front of somebody, whether it's at the front desk or the cashier at McDonald's, or, you know, in client services or representing their designs or whatever to the client, is that going to show up well? That's the question. And you pay people more if that answer is yes, and to the degree of which it is yes. And so that is a very tangible way to enter into work as it relates to remuneration and
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
I do like that triumvirate that you named: integrity,
Goodwill
goodwill.
and competence.
Yeah, that's a good triumvirate.
For
Right.
trust.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, I it brings to mind, I'm a bit of a gearhead, like engines. And Mazda came up with a rotary engine. I think it was around the early 80s. It was a 3-cylinder. And the efficiency in that engine was that motion happened in a way that built momentum on itself. Okay, in this 3-piston engine, right? In this triangle. And it kind of invokes that for me, that each one of the pillars in that triangle, or the points in that triangle, propels the other forward, right? And if you can imagine something fractal, where you're in a dynamic organization where everybody else has those 3 at work in them as well. I think that's a beautiful thought to put in front of people.
Yeah. It served us well.
Mm-hmm.
I want to kind of just try to come back to this idea. I can imagine that somebody's like, okay, how do I think that principle is very tangible, of like how I enter into work and how I, negotiate in that. But can we talk about making a deal, or negotiating a salary, or where the offering of ourselves into either a shared deal making scenario or in a salary negotiation? How do you think people should think about that almost at any stage of their career?
Well, that's a big question. I suppose you would want to have a fair assessment of the way that the work is valued in general in the marketplace. And then you would want to measure yourself and your capacity against those appraisals, and then tell the truth about what you think you have to bring in that space. And this is maybe where some of the tactics that get bandied about could be distanced from, because immediately people are encouraged to start selling themselves instead of just telling the plain truth about what they have. And we haven't talked yet about the Christian perspective, that when you are operating inside of what we refer to, what Jesus referred to as the kingdom of God, and that is simply his way and his resources. It's where what God wants done gets done, or the range of his effective will, right? We think about a kingdom, and a kingdom is a space where the king's resources reside. And that's what a kingdom is. If you're in the kingdom of God, it means that you're never on your own in terms of where resource is coming from. It's not just coming from you. And that invites a trust of you that provides the freedom to tell the truth. Okay? I trust God that if I tell the truth, I will nonetheless be okay. And I'm placing nonetheless in that sentence strategically, because of the habit of thought that most people begin with, the lean or the tilt in them. I'm probably going to have to bear some false witness here in order to secure a position. That's how most people enter into an interview. So if you're on your own and you're not in the kingdom of God, you're probably going to need some of that. You're going to have to dress yourself up in some way. You're going to have to sell something beyond what you've got in order to get in the door. And I know a lot of well-meaning Christians who would say, yeah, that's all a part of stepping into a space. I don't think that's true.
Fake it till you make it.
Fake it till you make it, right? What if it's the case that, let's say I'm negotiating a salary, and because I live in the kingdom of God, and I trust God to provide for me to such an extent that I'm willing to tell the truth wherever I am, that maybe the market value is above what I have to bring. And I tell the truth about that. I have these capacities, and they may not be what other applicants have, but in my other two prongs of this triangle, okay, so I might be low on the competence side, but I've got integrity for days. And I am going to will the good of everybody in this organization. And I trust that as I do, my competence is going to grow. And can you imagine stepping into an interview in that kind of trust and with that sort of surrender? And can you imagine the long-standing effects in you of maybe losing a few bids for a job, but finally getting a yes from someone who knows to prize the things that you refuse to compromise on?
Mm-hmm.
And which organization do you want to work in? Right? Those are the questions that I put before somebody as they're thinking about what's a fair exchange of value. Are you prepared to be fair in your appraisal of yourself?
And I think you can hold your dignity in that process.
Yeah, it's the only way to hold your dignity.
Well, and let me unpack it from another side. But it's like if somebody came and let's say a job was posted for 80,000 above market value, and somebody said, you know, I have integrity and I have goodwill. I'm going to show up here and I'm going to serve. But I think my experience as it relates to my competency is lower than what this job requires. So I'm willing to work with you that I will take a $70,000 or whatever lower amount where I think my value is fair for that. And then I'll work with you over the course. We can reevaluate this in a year and you would give me the bump back up to that or wherever my competency is at the time. And if an interviewee said that to me, they would immediately stand out, if nothing else.
Well, and they would because of the type of person you are, Jason, and the interviewee would be blessed to encounter you in that space. And it proves the principle that I would also invite that we put in front of young people is that when you go and apply for a job, you're also interviewing that employer. And when I was applying for graduate school, I was thinking about this because I'm investing what was to me at the time an enormous sum of money and an enormous amount of my resource besides in a process that I care very deeply about. And the dilemma that that is set in front of you in such a condition is that you're once again presented with this situation where you have to sell yourself to a school. You're applying, right? You're applying for acceptance into this program that might have great clout. And this was a real challenge for me because I came from a blue-collar world and I had already spent a lot of time with men in that space, and I'd had them prove themselves to me. I'd seen character on display. I'd seen what goes wrong in a company when the guy at the helm is a tyrant. And the thought that I had was that, well, I can't imagine academic life being any different. Can't imagine that it looks any different if the director of the faculty is an. And am I willing to go study under an for 3 years and spend $45,000? And so I, before applying, went and interviewed the faculty of the places that I was looking to apply to. And I'm not proposing that this will happen for every young person who does so. But in my final interview process, I had gone and interviewed the faculties at 3 different universities and told them what I was doing. And one of them, I and my wife flew to go and interview before I applied. The last of those 3 was the one that was the institution that proved themselves most trustworthy to me in terms of the character of their faculty. And it just so happened that that was the institution that called me and said, we would like to have you, and we'd like to forego your application process. We're not going to interview you. Your interviews of us have been enough. Okay? And that was how I got into graduate school. Dynamics like that can happen when we commit ourselves to the right values. And we don't take on the mistaken thought that ethics are ethics and principles are principles, and they apply in all other cases except this one that I really hope to have an outcome in. They either apply everywhere or they apply nowhere. And they prove themselves to you in what you're willing to test them in. And so, boy, I would encourage young people to get clear on their ethics. And that is an antecedent to a proper experience with money, with employment, with home ownership, with whatever you can conceive of. You don't wait until midway through a career to figure these things out. You start attempting to figure them out now. And life and death do hang in the balance. Anyone who's been employed by someone who has poor character knows the hell that is as a daily experience. And anybody who's hired someone who bore false witness about who they were knows the hell that is wrought inside of their team until that person finally dissolves their relationship with your organization. These things matter more than whatever vehicle you want to put in that garage of yours. And we just have to say them once in order for the case to be proven. As we say these things, people understand we're telling the truth here. There aren't other versions of this, you know. It matters that much. And life and death hang in the balance. Spiritual life, you know, the joy that you get to experience in your day. That's what we're talking about is life and death. Because you live enough days without joy, you end up dying. First in your spirit and then in your body.
Yeah. You know, we talked a lot about young people entering into the career.
Yeah.
I imagine that there's also some people who are like, yeah, I want those young people to apply in my context. And one of the things that I found tremendously helpful is at the beginning of every interview, job application interview, I tell the party that we're interviewing is saying, hey, this is actually a mutual discernment of fit.
That's right. And
most employers, you know, especially in a scarce job market, but sometimes it hasn't been a scarce job market. Like there's been booms where there's been a labor shortage, right? And it's just so clarifying for everyone saying, look, my goal is not to test you on your ability to recall answers
That's right.
You know, in an hour to 3 hours or however long your interview process is or each step of the interview process. It's for us to actually see if there's something that when we enter into this together over the next year to 10 years, that we're going to feel great about it, you know? And so if you tell the truth and we tell the truth, we're both going to be happier if we say yes to what we both see or no to what we both see.
Yeah, that brings to mind too, how much of, and this is on the side of the employer and an encouragement to the employer, the metrics that situations defined as real become real in their consequences. And if the situation is defined only in terms of a narrow view of, quarterly earnings, right? That's all we've got in our metric. We're going to miss so much of the person because of the parameters that we set for the work. And that starts early too. I was with one of my children just last night, and they were in tears because of the examination process that's set before them, and it's multiple choice, and they've got ADD, and they do terribly with multiple choice metrics, right? And multiple choice is such a paltry way of appraising someone's competence. And so many employers have paltry methods for appraising competence. They're only looking for a shard of the individual. And I think, back to my child, this school doesn't have a hot clue what they're missing in terms of what this girl has on offer. And the glowing ways that she's got competence that is so practical. And they're just not measuring for it. They're not measuring for whether or not she can take a little bit of food item ingredients in a fridge that are left over and create a work of art with it, which she can do reliably. Or steward an environment into a dynamic beauty that benefits everybody in the mix. Everyone just takes a breath because this of my children was the curator of that space. Or I could keep going on and on and on and on. And so for employers, what are you looking for in the person? And maybe there's opportunity to expand the range of considerations to have a more human view of the work that you're aspiring to do. Maybe distancing from some of the cultural motifs that over and over again only prize these things, pattern recognition. I won't beat that horse anymore, but I think it's important. And what you are endeavoring to produce is only half the story. What kinds of people you bring into the mix on the side of production is a more beautiful part of the story. And somehow the product at the end of that is going to bear the hallmarks of all of those people if you had eyes to see the fullness of that person that was in front of you. So look in those directions would be an encouragement. I love the way that you interview. I love the things you look for in people. I've seen it. It's wonderful. And the proof of it is here walking around in this space with us right now.
Sure.
Right? I love every one of these people. I trust every one of these people because of what you were looking for in them. Right? So to that, I should say thank you.
Can I tell you a story that benefited somebody I didn't hire?
Please.
This just happened last week.
Yeah.
This was 2018. But just a few weeks ago, somebody said, "Hey, I'm in town. Can I meet with you?" And I kind of remember his name. And when I saw his face, I was like, "Oh yeah, like this is another employee's brother-in-law, an employee that used to work here. It's his brother-in-law. And his name's Isaac. And Isaac says, can we get together? I'd love to be in person, and I have no idea what he wants to say. And it was 2018, and there's a lot you don't remember from things that are, that far back.
Doesn't seem that far back, but it is.
Oh, it's 8 years, right? So, and he came and he, because of the qualities of our workplace and, the things that we've gotten right in that, the guy who used to work with me is like, "Oh, this would be a great place for my brother-in-law to come and work." And so he applied to a job that was like one of the open positions, and it was like a general office administrative job at the time. And as I sat with him and I was discerning, like, hey, is this the right job for you? Uh, it immediately came up. And so about an hour in, I said, hey, I don't think this is the job for you. Like, and at the time he was landscaping, he was in a landscaping job and he was working for his father-in-law. And he's like, I've got a kid on the way. I know that I need to make a change.
Mhm.
And he had an inkling that sales might be the right thing. And he went right into the next job. Uh, he was just looking for something else.
Right.
And what I ended up doing is I was like, oh, I can see that based on what you're saying. Like there's something in that area.
Mhm.
And I happened to have another friend who was looking to expand his sales force. And I said, I connected the two of them. I named what I saw as good in him. I was able to make that connection in a meaningful way. And he ended up getting the job. And he tried that industry, and that dynamic wasn't a good fit for him, but that allowed him to get the next job
Mhm.
about a year later with another connection that he had. And he got this, he was selling software, was the next job. And he was looking for a sales coach to help him be better at his job. And he reached out to a guy and he said, hey, I don't have any money, but could you coach me for free? And the guy was like, no,
I love his gumption.
no, I can't. Yeah. But a few months later, he was watching that same sales coach's videos and he said, this is so good. It would be better digested in short format. And
Right.
so he took it upon himself just to cut them into short format. And he sent them over and said, hey, I think this would be very beneficial for you. And the guy
Brilliant.
tries to write him back and sees that on LinkedIn, he had already said he wouldn't coach the guy for free. And he said, hey, if you can do this for me, just a couple of these a week,
Mhm.
I'd be happy to coach you for free.
Mm.
And this was an expensive sales coach.
Right.
And so that he ends up coaching him for free. And because of the trust dynamics, because he showed competence and he showed integrity, and he was willing to grow in this, in his competence in sales, that trust ended up saying, hey, the sales coach ended up hiring my friend Isaac and said, come and work for me.
Mhm.
And he's not in the sales team. He's the COO of a sales coaching organization that's a multi-million-dollar organization.
What a story. Beautiful.
And so, it was such a gift because he ended up, giving me a bottle of Irish whiskey, as a thank you for that. And I think when we enter into proper discernment of the value exchange and what that costs everyone long term and
Yeah.
things like that, what is beautiful and moving about that story for me was honor.
Yes.
So I didn't give him a job.
That's right.
Like I did give him a connection, but he came back 8 years later and said, because he happened to be in town for a month, he lives abroad at this moment. And he said, when I look back at my story, the dots that connect, I see an inflection point in this kind of discernment happening in this kind of interview.
Mhm.
And I can have a scotch to that kind of story all day long.
That's so beautiful.
And he said he's making 5 times what he was making landscaping.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like all of this matters because if we take a medium to long-term approach in these things and we work on the, these first principles that we've been talking about as it relates to a value exchange, and we don't get summed up in or, swept up into this idea of, hey, am I just chasing money or am I just like going along with this flow that's in the rest of our culture to like get the thing so that I find happiness in a way that actually doesn't fulfill. All of that, if we come back to those first principles and we apply those, it is the best long-term strategy for us. It is the one where meaning, fulfillment, joy, it's not going to be the thing that optimizes for material wealth.
Yeah.
But it is going to be the thing that operates for true wealth.
Yes.
And that feels like a good gig.
No
with
doubt
some
about it.
suffering along the way.
Yeah, and just to weave together some continued threads, that ends up being what Jesus means by his statement, seek first the kingdom of God and its righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you. He's talking about a life. And you can either seek the alternatives to that kingdom, or you can seek that kingdom. And the alternatives to that kingdom produce very reliable kinds of misery. But what was going on in the space where this, what was his name again?
Isaac.
Isaac comes to you and says, hey, with a full heart, I'm trying to make something better here in my life. And you lovingly, inside of the kingdom and the aspirations that are appropriate to it, said, I don't think this is the right place for you. It would not be loving, in other words, for me to appease this short-term need at the expense of whatever long-term person you're meant to become in your work. And so you together lived out the truth that convention is the end of creativity, and there's something about courage that needs to be stated here too. Courage and calling are always tethered, always, because you're constantly being summoned into things that are uncomfortable because you're not familiar with them. That's how we grow, right? The great psychologist Adam Grant, celebrated psychologist, says that the most innovative people in the world are the ones who fail more than others attempt, right? And this friend of yours seems to have that gumption in him, and that is lacking in it's a cowardly perspective to say, I'm going to do whatever I need in order to secure my position. There's no courage in that. There's courage in saying, I'm going to hold to my ethic, whatever the case. And I'm going to entrust myself to something beyond me to be secure. And I just love the example that you gave in the ways that it reveals that to all of us. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
I'm inspired by it.
Well, that's great.
Yeah.
I'm inspired by him.
Yeah, no doubt.
In chatting and kind of preparing for this, I just got a couple, maybe they're quick hitters, maybe
Sure.
they're not.
Sure.
But I think one of the questions that comes up in this is it okay to want to not be poor?
Yeah, it's sane. It's better than okay.
And so maybe let me give more context behind that question is sometimes when it's like, hey, I got to enter into this idea of money. We hear the love of money is the root of all evil.
Mm-hmm.
So can I want to be rich, or do I have to be poor? And I understand those are the two.
I'd
extremes.
encourage you away from wanting to be rich. It will lead you right into the things that we've just named, right? And wanting to be rich is a love of money, right? And it's a wrong definition of wealth again. So we're starting out with an equation that's going to guarantee some trouble down the road there. Is it okay to want to have enough and to want to be in a position where if I wanted to, and if somebody had the need, I could bless them right now? Yes, that's sane. And so what is the redemptive aspiration? It's to becoming the sort of person who is resourced to be able to meet whatever need walks in front of me. And material wealth is a big part of that. Money as a tool is a valuable tool. And to be able to bless somebody in need very often requires material. It's not the only way to bless somebody in need. We bless with time, we bless with presence, we bless with information, etc.
We can also bless with spiritual gifts, which is maybe a
All-
whole episode in and of itself.
You bet. And I would say a lot of those ones that I named would be on that list of spiritual gifts, right?
Mhm.
But to want to be rich is a fool's errand. And another good thought experiment is, how trustworthy do you experience the people whose strongest desire is to be rich?
Hmm.
How safe do you feel in their presence? How present do you feel they are to you? How much time do they have? Is the relationship you have with them as important to them as their aspirations that they might have besides? I'll just leave that as an open
and
question.
do you think the desire to make money, can you nuance the difference between those two? I want to be rich versus is it okay to want to make money?
Sure. It's a sane thing to want to make money.
A sane thing, just in
Yes.
case, not
Yes.
the same. Just
No.
because we're trying
It's a sane
yeah.
thought to want to make money, because money is a tool that can bless. I can't take care of my family without it.
Yeah, and again, if we're understanding what money is as a technology or a tool that facilitates the exchange of value, then all of a sudden we can have a more meaningful idea of like, okay, well, it's not a means in and of itself.
Yeah, and maybe a clarifying statement is, and this stands up in the theology of Jesus. Material wealth is not inherently unspiritual or immoral. Okay? That's one that twists people up. They hear the words of Jesus maybe in a piecemeal fashion. They hear statements about the rich young ruler selling everything he had. That was a particular case, right? He was had by the things he had. And to want to have things is a guarantee on being had by the things you want.
Maybe just let's slow down because we're moving so fast.
Sure.
There's a story in the New Testament where Jesus is walking by and there's this rich young ruler who comes to him, and he shows actually like
he's been a very faithful man,
and he's got spiritual intelligence.
That's right.
That proves that he has it insinuates that there's some moral character there.
Well, Jesus basically puts the 10 Commandments before him, and the rich young man says, I've done all these things faithfully.
And then he says, what do I have to do to live in the kingdom that you and I were talking about earlier, where God is the king and we can enter into his resourcefulness and all those kinds of things. And then Jesus says to him, sell all your things, give them to the poor, and come follow me. And so I just wanted to set that as a context, just in case somebody's not familiar with the story, or to a reminder of those who are. And then what happens? Like, why is that not the case for every person who wants to follow
Because
Jesus?
Jesus is always going to expose in us the thing that we hold in place of what can benefit us. And another way of saying that is he's always going to expose to us what unduly possesses us. And this young man proved in his response where his treasure lay. And Jesus unpacks that to follow how hard it is for the rich to enter the kingdom of heaven. He doesn't say it's impossible. Okay? And he also didn't say that if you're impoverished, it's easier. That's another thing to get in front of people's minds. Poverty is not inherently spiritual. Okay? Being an under-resourced individual does not advantage you when you're trying to figure out how to build a life that can bless anybody. And so Jesus exposes in this man the things that possessed him, because being an inhabitant of the kingdom of God is also a state of freedom. And this man was not free. And so he honed in on the thing that captured him. And it is recorded that the rich young man walked away despondent, and Jesus felt compassion for him. And we can all look at that guy and say, hey, he was doing pretty well. He was a righteous person. And how many of us have turned away from things that we knew invited our attention or our surrender because we simply wanted to keep the things that we want. And that's all of us. Right?
In Catholic tradition, the tradition is that he actually did return.
That's right.
And his name is Didymus or something along those lines. It's not quite that, but it's something like that. Which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah, no doubt.
We don't know that for sure. It's not in the scripture, but oral tradition would share that he did come back. So I feel like there's so much more, and there's probably more questions. And I'm sure as we kind of take this in from our community who listens to this and, hopefully other people, we'll probably have to do another episode on as it relates from work and money. And there's not only work, but money in general, like what's a wise way to hold that, in budgeting and, can I give money to the poor, or how do I do that in a productive way?
What are frugality and generosity and
all of those things. So I know that there's probably a ton more questions, but I think that's good for us to park it today.
Yeah.
And thank you for the time in being able to dialogue with you. I feel like it's been good.
Thank you, Jason. I was reminded of a lot and I learned a lot. So thank you.
Wonderful. Okay. Well, catch everyone on the next episode.
Look forward to it.